42 presidents and nearly 200 children have lived in the White House, including adopted children, grandchildren, nieces, and nephews. For most of these youngsters, a White House childhood meant growing up in front of millions of eyes and ears, and being saddled with very high expectations. This exhibit offers a peek into presidential kids' private moments, the laughter and sorrows, births, deaths, and weddings that have etched personal emotions into America's house. Two of the most watched presidential tots of all time were the children of John and Jackie Kennedy. Our Children in the White House exhibit begins with the Caroline Kennedy doll collection, 89 dolls that were showered upon President Kennedy's daughter from the leaders of 30 countries. These dolls are on loan courtesy of the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum in Boston, Massachusetts. The world's fascination with the Kennedy children was reflected in the many gifts sent to them from every corner of the globe. While John Jr. was given a toy soldier or a rocket ship, his sister would almost always receive a doll. Since the White House was overwhelmed with children's gifts, Jacqueline Kennedy donated many of the American dolls to orphanages and hospitals where less fortunate children could enjoy them. Foreign dolls were considered gifts of state, and so were restored and eventually deposited in the collections of the Kennedy Library. From handmade folk treasures to exquisite art dolls, this collection offers a stunning virtual tour of the ethnic and cultural diversity that exists throughout our world. A plastic doll represents a Canadian Girl Guide wearing a blue cotton twill uniform with insignia, maple leaf pin, and belt buckle, a beret, and silver whistle. Eskimo doll with a plastic face and red cloth body is dressed in a faux fur coat and felt shoes. Native American Pueblo doll has a cloth body, leather hands, and is wearing a white velvet dress belted with a turquoise and copper ribbon. Kachina dolls were traditionally created for the young girls of the Hopi Indian tribes as a link to the spiritual world. This Kachina dances for the Jakwane dance of hunting time. In the 1963 photograph, the National Congress of American Indians is presenting this doll to President Kennedy in the White House Rose Garden. This collection of plastic dolls represents the traditional costumes of the 18 different provinces of Mexico. The collection was given to Caroline Kennedy by the daughter of the President of Mexico. Two cloth dolls represent a boy selling his wares in the market and a girl balancing a basket on her head. This three-piece band of musicians plays the maracas, a drum, and a guitar. They are made of cotton, felt, leather, and wood. This female doll, with a wire armature and felt body, wears a cotton skirt banded with colored ribbons. Peruvian Indian cloth doll wears a wool jacket and multicolored shawl pinned in front with a coin. On her back she carries a baby with a crocheted cap. The doll was a gift from Manuel Prado Ugarteche, President of Peru. Gauchos are cowboys of mixed Indian and Spanish ancestry. This gaucho doll, with a wire and felt body, is wearing a fringed cotton poncho, brown leather boots, and carrying a rope lasso. The doll was a gift from the member of the National Council of the Government of Uruguay. In traditional Norwegian festival costumes, the male doll has a celluloid body and wears black wool overalls with silver buttons. The female doll's body of plastic and plaster wears a pleated skirt and bibbed apron with suspenders. Both dolls were presented to Caroline Kennedy by the Norwegian Prime Minister Einar Gerhardsen at the White House in 1962. This female doll, dressed in a wool cape and an apron dress with lace sleeves and a collar, a yellow wool underskirt, and knitted shawl. A Dutch girl wears a black wool jacket with windmill print trim and wooden shoes, representing symbols of Holland. Two Christmas caroling dolls have plaster bodies and wear wool sweaters, scarves, and shawls. 4 plaster shepherd dolls tend to their sheep. The dolls were presented to Caroline by Her Royal Highness Grand Duchess Charlotte of Luxembourg during her 1963 visit to the White House. Representing German costumes, the boy doll wears lederhosen and a peaked cap. The female doll, with blonde braids coiled over her ears, wears a black corset, white pantaloons, and a pink striped skirt. These dolls of rubber and plastic wear beautiful French fashions. One has a white lace blouse tied with ribbon bows, a paisley print fichu, and white taffeta skirt with velvet and gold brocade trim. The other is dressed in a ribbed silk skirt with bands of red and gold braid. A wooden Pinocchio doll sports a pink jersey and yellow cotton suspenders and shorts. This pair is dressed in Moravian costumes, an eastern region in what is now known as the Czech Republic. Clothing pieces are decorated with multicolored embroidery, beads, and lace. Dolls are made of cloth and felt, dressed in Hungarian clothing. The girl doll's costume includes a blue brocade skirt trimmed with felt flowers, a black lace fichu, and pink slippers. The male doll wears a white felt cloak trimmed with red and green stripes, pantaloon, vest, and hat. Male and female singing dolls are dressed in traditional costumes from the mountain regions of Austria. Costume pieces include a vest and cummerbund for the boy doll. The girl doll sports perky braids and a striped apron. Male dolls wear the costume of the Greek Evzone soldiers with pleated skirts, shirts, embroidered jackets, and gartered stockings. The female dolls wear colorful, layered costumes in the Greek tradition. All have cloth bodies and plastic arms. These Greek musician dolls play a horn, a drum, a violin, and the last is holding a staff. All are made from wood, wire, and fabric, and the dolls' heads and hands are carved from wood. This cloth doll is dressed in a blouse, black felt bodice, green felt skirt, and embroidered apron. She was created by the famous doll maker Lenzi of Turin, Italy. The photo shows Caroline receiving this doll from the Italian Prime Minister at the White House in 1963. The male doll is made of rubber and dressed in the uniform of the Palace Guards. This doll was a gift from Her Serene Highness Princess Grace of Monaco during her 1961 visit to the White House. The female doll with a rubber body is dressed in an African outfit of purple and gold cotton with a head cloth. The doll was presented to President Kennedy as a gift for Caroline in 1962 by the President of the Republic of Ivory Coast. Jordanian dolls have wooden bodies. The male doll wears a tobe, a high-neck gown of blue striped satin, and holds prayer beads in his hand. The female is dressed in a ribbed silk gown with gold thread embroidery, topped by a velvet jacket and a red tarbouche, or fez. The mayor of Bethlehem gave these dolls to Caroline Kennedy. A cloth soldier doll wears khaki cotton trousers and a tunic, a navy bolero, and black turban. Of Pathan origin, he represents a large ethnic group residing in the frontier provinces of Pakistan and Afghanistan. This doll from Peshawar, Pakistan, was given to Jackie Kennedy in March of 1962. Representing the Bhutia culture from the mountains of northern India, this couple is dressed in flowing gowns and long scarves. The female costume is red and gold brocade. Two plaster dolls are dressed in traditional Indian silk saris. The dancing Hindu doll in blue and gold has metal bracelets. The seated doll in orange and gold wears gold and silver jewelry. The dolls came from Indira Gandhi, daughter of India's Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. In the photo, First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy poses with the two dolls in New Delhi. Dressed in a flowing skirt with sequins and a ruffled overskirt, the doll's upper body is made from papier-mâché. A spiral spring under the skirt makes the doll dance. This male puppet has a cloth body, a wooden head, and painted face. A gold helmet is decorated with fishtails and flowers. Birds are attached to the arms, which are moved with the attached poles. Presented to President Kennedy by the Indonesian president during his 1961 visit to the White House. A male doll with a cloth body and painted face is dressed in satin trousers and tunic trimmed with gold rickrack and finished with a blue satin skirt. An imperial court doll set consists of 15 Kokin Bina style of Hina dolls to celebrate Girls' Day festival. The dolls are traditionally placed on 4 tiers for display. The 14 dolls on exhibit here have bisque faces and wood hands. Emperor and Empress dolls. On the top tier, the rulers are in a seated position and costumed in multicolored brocade. The emperor holds a sword in one hand. The empress carries a paper fan. Ladies-in-waiting dolls. On the second tier, the ladies-in-waiting wear multicolored red, white, and gold brocade costumes. Musician dolls. On the third tier, musicians wear multicolored red, green, and gold brocade costumes. Minister dolls. On the bottom tier, ministers wear red, blue, white, and gold brocade costumes. These 2 dolls, with bisque faces and hands, wear kimonos of orange silk embroidered with a floral pattern and a red and gold multicolored print crepe with a yellow and red brocade obi. President and Mrs. Kennedy spent a lot of time with their children during daily breakfasts together and occasional family picnics. John Jr.'s favorite hiding place was under his father's desk in the Oval Office. Jackie designed a special playground on the south lawn, and the children swam in the large fountain in the White House lawn. The play area was complete with living quarters for various pets, including dogs and ponies. John's pony was named Leprechaun, and Caroline's pony, Macaroni, was given to her by Vice President Lyndon Johnson. Concerned that reporters might follow Caroline to school, the First Lady created a classroom in the solarium on the 3rd floor of the White House. This bright, sunny room became the schoolhouse for Caroline and 10 of her friends. The young students, driven to the White House by their parents, brought their own lunch boxes each day. The classroom was center for finger painting, games, and singing. Blocks, model trains, puzzles, stuffed animals, toys, and books filled the room. Dolls occupied Caroline's room in the White House. Dominating at one end of the room was a painted wooden playhouse, a gift from the wife of the French President Charles de Gaulle in 1961. It received a lot of playtime by Caroline and her friends, and was later used by Caroline Kennedy's own children. Now we will visit the rest of the children in the White House exhibit. It was George Washington who decided that the president should work and live in the same residence, a decision that put presidential families into the national spotlight and, unfortunately, brought on many problems. According to historians, presidential children have higher rates of divorce, alcoholism, and self-destruction when compared to their same-age counterparts. Even so, many followed their fathers into government service. Several presidential sons were elected to Congress, served in the cabinet, or became ambassadors. 2 were themselves elected to the presidency, John Quincy Adams and George W. Bush. The construction of the president's house lasted beyond Washington's 2 terms and was still unfinished when the first occupants, John and Abigail Adams, moved in. Although porches, wings, and a basement have been added in 200 years since the executive mansion was built, the original shape and architectural form survive today. Originally called the President's House, it was officially named the White House in 1901. On 6 floors, the 55,000 square foot house contains 132 rooms. 16 private rooms are for the first family and guests. The White House has a barber shop, beauty salon, library, swimming pool, exercise gym, bowling alley, movie theater, putting green, tennis court, horseshoe court, jogging track, and dental and medical clinics. Here is a look at the many young children who lived at the White House. James Monroe believed that education was as important for girls as boys, and his daughters were well educated for the era. When Maria married Samuel Gouverneur in 1820, she became the first presidential child to be married in a White House ceremony. Their first child was born in the president's mansion, but lived less than 1 year. Their second child was also born in the mansion. John Quincy Adams' son, George, suffered from mental instability and died at age 28 after a suspicious accident. John Adams II became his father's secretary, and in 1828 he married his cousin in a White House ceremony. Charles Francis enjoyed a distinguished political career. His grandson, Charles Francis Adams III, great-grandson of John Quincy Adams, served as Secretary of the Navy during the Hoover administration. At the ages of 52 and 43, Abraham and Mary Lincoln were among the youngest couples to reside in the White House. The president had a formal relationship with his eldest son, Robert, a student at Harvard, but Willie and Tad were allowed to burst in on the president at any time. Tad had a speech impediment, so Willie became his interpreter. Willie also explained their way out of such mischief as selling refreshments in the entrance hall and squeezing paint tubes all over the walls during a portrait sitting. In 1862, a typhoid-like disease took the life of young Willie, whose funeral was held in the East Room. Soon, Tad continued his White House adventures alone by hitching 2 goats to a chair and riding through the East Room. He wheeled his toy cannon outside the cabinet room to bomb the door during important meetings. And one time, as President Lincoln reviewed Union troops under the portico of the White House, Tad snuck behind him to wave a Confederate flag. Andrew Jr., a teenager during his father's White House years, often helped his mother, who was sick with tuberculosis. Because of the First Lady's illness, their 2 daughters, Martha and Mary, served as official hostesses. The 5 grandchildren livened up the White House corridors and were tutored in a basement schoolroom. Frederick and Buck attended West Point and Harvard before joining the White House staff as secretaries to their father. Nellie was sent to a proper finishing school, but was unhappy there, and soon joined her family in Washington. She married Englishman Algernon Sartoris in the East Room of the White House in 1874. Youngest son Jesse, who had a horse, a parrot, and several dogs to keep him company, spent many hours with a telescope and astronomical charts on the White House roof. Even though this First Lady was dubbed Lemonade Lucy after banning all wine and alcoholic drinks, the White House was so full of guests that when their boys visited during college breaks, one slept in the bathtub. On Sunday evenings, the family sang gospel songs in the upstairs library with friends and members of the Cabinet and Congress. When Congress banned the rolling of Easter eggs on the grounds of the Capitol, Lucy Hayes invited all the local children to celebrate on the White House lawn. The tradition continues today. The Garfields brought 5 children to the White House. The younger sons rode 3-wheeled bicycles around the East Room, while the 2 older sons studied under a private tutor. Here, Molly met her future husband, who was a secretary to the president. In the summer of 1871, an unsuccessful office seeker named Charles Guiteau fired 2 shots at President Garfield, who died 80 days later. The president often stopped work at noon to play the afternoon away with his 3 grandchildren, Marthena Harrison and her cousins Mary and Benjamin McKee, nicknamed Baby McKee. The grandchildren's favorite pet was a goat named His Whiskers, who pulled them around in a cart on the south lawn. One day, His Whiskers darted through the White House gates with the grandchildren in tow. President Harrison ran after them down Pennsylvania Avenue, brandishing his top hat in one hand and his cane in the other. The goat finally stopped after Washington residents came to the rescue of the commander-in-chief. What a family! The Roosevelt clan frightened visiting officials with snakes, skated on polished floors, stilt-walked through the East Room, and spattered President Jackson's portrait with spitballs. The menagerie of pets included a horned toad, guinea pigs, a Brazilian macaw, a pig, a bear, ponies, ducks, a kangaroo rat, and a flying squirrel. Alice smoked in public and wore breeches when horse riding. But when T.R. was asked why he could not tame his daughter, the president replied, "I can be president of the United States, or I can control Alice." Archie loved to slide down staircase banisters on the silver trays swiped from the kitchen, and White House guards learned not to stand outside under balconies, or they would get bombed with water balloons. Bob Taft graduated from Yale and then went to Harvard Law School, later becoming one of the most distinguished senators in the 20th century. Helen studied at Bryn Mawr and often helped with White House hostessing. Youngest son Charlie was once caught with his buddy Archie Roosevelt under a table in the state dining room, tying guests' shoelaces together. Charlie later studied law at Yale and, in 1955, was elected mayor of Cincinnati, Ohio. Although both of the Coolidge boys were away at school, they spent holiday breaks at the White House. Their dogs and a mynah bird kept the White House maids in a state of terror, along with cats who took turns riding up and down the elevator. Rebecca the raccoon enjoyed her own outdoor house, built for her by Cal Jr. and his father. During the day, Rebecca wandered the halls of the White House, unscrewing light bulbs and unpotting palms. At age 16, Cal Jr. suffered from a blister that became infected. Blood poisoning ensued, and tragically the boy died during his father's 1924 campaign. President and Mrs. Hoover had 2 grown sons. Allen was a student at Stanford University. Herbert Jr. and his wife Margaret had 3 young children, Peggy Ann, Herbert Hoover III, called Pete, and Joan, who was born in 1930. Later that year, when Herbert Jr. was diagnosed with tuberculosis, the Hoover grandchildren came to live at the White House. Every day for 6 months, Pete and Peggy each held their grandfather's hands as they walked slowly to the Oval Office, where they were rewarded with goodies kept in his desk drawer. Stories about the grandchildren rarely made the news, however, because the president felt that personal affairs were not for public scrutiny. By May of 1931, Herbert Jr. had recuperated and continued his career as a mining engineer. He also served as Undersecretary of State from 1954 to 1956. Allen Hoover went into banking and later helped run the Hoover Institution of War, Revolution, and Peace at Stanford University. FDR's children helped him greatly during his administration before they served in World War II. Daughter Anna moved into the White House in 1933 while going through a divorce and brought her 2 children, 6-year-old Anna Eleanor, called Sisty, and 3-year-old Curtis, nicknamed Buzzy. The First Lady installed a teeter-totter and playhouse on the White House roof. They also enjoyed a sandbox, metal slide, jungle gym, and a swing that hung from an old huge tree. Holidays were lively when FDR and Eleanor were joined by all of their children and 13 grandchildren. Lyndon Johnson attended the University of Texas, but still garnered a lot of attention when she dated Hollywood actor George Hamilton. Lucy Johnson, a high school student in 1963, would zip around Washington in a Stingray convertible. Lucy often remarked that everything she and her sister said, everything they wore or did, every boy they said hello to, became public knowledge. Both girls were married during their father's presidency. Lucy's church wedding was first in 1966, with her reception at the White House. A year later, Linda was married in a beautiful White House ceremony. Lucy was the first to give her presidential father a grandson, Patrick Nugent Jr., who was the delight of the White House. "It happened overnight to us," Steve Ford remarked in later years after President Richard Nixon suddenly announced his resignation. Eldest son Mike had recently married and avoided the White House media glare. Jack made headlines by dating celebrities. Steve fled Washington to hit the rodeo circuit, and Susan invited her entire class to a high school prom held in the East Room of the White House. She noted that every single girl in the class showed up for that prom. They all discovered what Jack observed. The big spotlight that the White House shines on first families definitely draws them closer. Of the Carters' 4 children, Jack stayed in Georgia. Chip and his wife Karen and their baby, as well as Jeff and his wife Annette, joined their younger sister Amy in the White House. Amy attended public schools in Washington. She and her father built a treehouse in an old cedar on the White House grounds. It was large enough to sleep 3 or 4 of her friends, plus her 2 pets, Grits the dog, and Misty Malarkey Yin Yang, the Siamese cat. One night, Amy and a friend crept into the Lincoln bedroom with a Ouija board to conjure up ghosts, and both were convinced they heard footsteps in the middle of the night. Chelsea's name came from the popular 1960s song by Joni Mitchell, Chelsea Morning. In Washington, she was enrolled in a private school. Her cat Socks and Buddy, the chocolate Labrador retriever, inspired thousands of letters from children wanting to know more about the first cat and the first dog. Chelsea was a frequent traveling companion of her parents, joined the First Lady on a number of international trips, and graduated from Stanford University. The fraternal pair of first twins shared the family spotlight as they began college. Barbara attended Yale, while Jenna attended the University of Texas at Austin. Numerous tabloid stories were written about their partying, but since their graduations in 2004, Barbara interned with the Smithsonian, the Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum, and worked with AIDS patients in Africa. Jenna worked as an intern at the United Nations Children's Fund and wrote a book about her experience. Jenna married Henry Hager, former White House aide at the Bush family ranch in Texas, on May 10, 2008. The children of 9 presidents had reached adulthood by the time their fathers became president. Here are 5 presidents who did not have biological children, one whose child died very young, and one who fathered a child during an extramarital affair. Washington became a stepfather of 2 of Martha's children, and later 2 stepchildren came to live with them. Madison became a stepfather to Dolly's son, who partied and gambled away his inheritance. The Jacksons adopted a nephew, one Creek Indian boy, and also became guardians to 3 Donaldson nephews, a grandnephew, and 3 orphan children of a family friend. The president took care of his nephew and personal ward, Marshall Polk. The only bachelor president, Buchanan became the official guardian of 2 orphaned nieces, Mary and Harriet Lane. Buchanan also cared for dozens of other young relatives. After Harding's death, it was publicized that an extramarital affair with Nan Britton had produced one child. Rivaling the royal weddings of Europe, White House nuptials bring ceremonial pomp and lavish spectacles to the presidency. While 19 presidential children were married while their fathers were chief executive, only 9 were married in the White House. 1812, the first wedding to take place in the White House was that of Lucy Payne Washington, the widowed sister of Dolly Madison. March 9, 1820, the first presidential daughter to marry in the White House was Maria Hester Monroe, who married her first cousin, Samuel Gouverneur, in the Blue Room. February 25, 1828, the first, and to date only presidential son to marry in the White House was John Adams II, who married his first cousin, Mary Catherine Helen, in the Blue Room. January 31, 1842, Elizabeth Lizzie Tyler, daughter of John Tyler, married attorney William Waller. June 2, 1886, President Grover Cleveland, the first and only president to marry in the White House, exchanged vows with Frances Folsom in the Blue Room. May 21, 1874, the daughter of Ulysses S. Grant, Nellie Grant, married Englishman Algernon Sartoris in the East Room. The president wept throughout the ceremony. February 17, 1906, Alice Roosevelt married Congressman Nicholas Longworth in front of 1,000 guests. She chose no bridesmaids, preferring 12 military aides and 8 ushers. The flamboyant Alice grabbed a military sword to dramatically slice her own wedding cake. November 25, 1913, Jessie Wilson, daughter of Woodrow Wilson, married attorney Francis Sayer in the East Room. May 7, 1914, Wilson's other daughter, Nellie, married Secretary of the Treasury, William McAdoo, in the Blue Room. August 6, 1966, Lucy Johnson married Patrick Nugent. The reception at the White House featured a 13-tier, 8-foot-high, 300-pound giant wedding cake. Lucy tossed her bouquet from the front of the Truman balcony, delivering it directly to her sister Linda. 4 months later, Linda Bird Johnson married White House military aide Charles Robb. A Marine Corps officer, Robb left for Vietnam soon after the wedding. June 12, 1971, Tricia Nixon married presidential aide Edward Cox in the first White House ceremony to take place in the Rose Garden. In 1956, 2 8-year-olds named David Eisenhower and Julie Nixon met at the Republican National Convention, where David's grandfather was nominated for a second presidential term, and Julie's father was nominated for a second term as vice president. 11 years later, the two went out on their first date. In 1968, 6 weeks after Richard Nixon was elected president, Julie married David in a small ceremony in New York City. This concludes our look at children in the White House. We hope you've enjoyed the program.